I'd like to call the Rules Committee meeting to order, please.
Alderman Rhodey. Alderman Kennedy.
Here.
Alderman Vollmer.
Present.
Alderman Vaquero.
Present.
Alderwoman Ingrassia.
Present.
Chairwoman Davis.
Present.
We have 5 present and we have a quorum.
Thank you. Today, we have several things that we're going to have before us. One is a board bill, the other is a resolution. The resolution will have a guest speaker that will speak before us in reference to it as we prepare to have a format for the future as we deal with it. The first thing I'd like to do is I'd like to recognize our Commissioner for the Civil Rights Enforcement Agency. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm good, thank you.
And my man just lost your name.
It would be Charles Bryson.
And I'm glad it is still Charles Bryson. Okay. So welcome, and I'm glad you're here. So you're here from the beginning, which is very important for us, and I'm sure you'll be able to help us as we move forward. The first thing I'd like to do is to hear Board Bill number 54. I need to preface this before the presentation is made that we will not be taking a vote today. We would like to hear the bill, and I'd like to come back and address it at the next meeting, okay? So, okay. So what I'd like to do is ask Alderwoman Green to go ahead and present her bill, Board Bill number 54.
Thank you, Alderman Davis. So Board Bill 54 is actually pretty simple, pretty straightforward. It does 2 things. First and foremost, it defines lobbyist for us at the Board of Aldermen and updates that definition to match the state definition of what constitutes a lobbyist. And I have some handouts here. I'll start with the Missouri revised statutes so we can see what the state definition of lobbying is. This is what they use in Jefferson City. And it does, and I'll pass out something else in a minute, but the state statute, for all that Jefferson City doesn't do well in terms of ethics and lobbying, they actually have a pretty good lobbying definition, and it actually is aligned with best practices for defining a lobbyist. So the Institute for Local Government, and I'll pass this out to you, basically defines or it sets out definitions for or basic best practices for ethics for local government. And for a lobbyist, it basically says that lobbyists should be defined based upon time and money. So if you are paid as part of your employment to advocate for or against a piece of legislation, and the amount of time that you spend as part of your condition of employment advocating for or against a piece of legislation. And so what you'll notice is the Missouri state definition does meet the time and the money test, and that is the exact definition that is brought forth into Board Bill 54. The second thing that Board Bill 54 does is it gets lobbyists off the floor of the Board of Aldermen. And I'll also pass around the rules for the Missouri State General Assembly. And basically the way that the General Assembly sets out their lobbying rules is this cannot be on the floor of the chamber. They can be in the hallway or the lobby, which is the origin of the word lobbyist actually was back in the 1880s when folks would go to to Congress and to try to influence legislation. They would do so by standing in the hallways of the Capitol, and that's actually the first time that lobbying became a concept, and the word lobbyist was created. So the Missouri State House of Representatives basically says that no person shall be admitted to the lower gallery of the House except members of the General Assembly, spouses of members, employees of the General Assembly, Joint Committee staff, the governor, lieutenant governors, basically other elected officials who are not lobbying for an individual or organization. No official or other person except current members of the General Assembly are allowed to enter the lower gallery by this House, from the House. So that's not to say that lobbyists are never allowed in any chambers. In committee meetings, lobbyists can come and testify, and that's pretty standard. That the time for a lobbyist to make their voice heard on how they feel on a piece of legislation is in that committee hearing where they can come and testify for or against something, and not during actual debate on the floor of the Board of Aldermen. And then the one other thing I'm going to pass out here is I'm going to thank Alderwoman Engrassia for helping to put this form together. But we went through and we looked at other city councils. And I work closely with an organization called Local Progress, which is a clearinghouse for kind of best practices in local government. And they reached out to a lot of their members across the country, and we actually could not find another example of where lobbyists are actually allowed on the floor in the chambers during debate. The examples that we do find, mostly are the same as the General Assembly, in that you can come and testify as a lobbyist during committee meeting, but during actual debate on a bill on the floor, that's not the time or the place for lobbyists to be present. And then just one last thing I'm going to pass out. This is pretty lengthy. And again, if we're not taking a vote on this today, it's just a good document for people to look through. But it's a handout of how every single state defines lobbying and lobbyists. And what you will see is most of the definitions do revolve around the time and the compensation piece. So how much time are you spending as a condition of your employment advocating for or against a piece of legislation, and are you being compensated for doing that? So with that said, I threw a lot of information at you pretty quickly. I had emailed most of this yesterday, with the exception of the local ordinance rules, which I'm happy to email out as well. But I'm happy to entertain any questions.
Okay, one of the things I wanted to do today, because I knew that most of you probably wouldn't have had an opportunity to digest all of this, is to give a further explanation why I'm not taking a vote today, is because you do need an opportunity to digest some of it. And also, one of the things that I wanted to do too, because we don't think about that rule every day, and you have the board bill in front of you, I wanted you to, after digesting all this, think about, what it is that affects you every day when you're sitting there on the floor, and if there's anything that needs to be changed. I do know that you did change your rules about 8 years ago that you even tightened it by having the absolute that you could not be on the floor unless you had a representative as being their guest, and which is part of why we have people stand and say who's their guest on the floor. And then you also don't allow anyone to stand up and talk to any alderperson while we're in session. They're not allowed to approach you. They're not allowed to talk to you. And I noticed that on several occasions that may have occurred in some minor way, but the president usually catches that and will do one or two things, give them a warning or put them out, which is what you should do. So let's take one round of questions if it's just something burning that you need to say now. But I wanted to make sure that I met the deadline because I didn't want this to get lost. And so I wanted to bring it before the committee, and then we can come back and have another meeting after you've had an opportunity to digest everything. So, Alderman Rhodey, is there anything right now?
You know, I think it's a superfluous piece of legislation that, you know, is designed to get some headlines. We have, historically, we've used Rule 51 if that was ever a problem. Remember, we'd stand up and say pursuant to Rule 30, I think it's 31, pursuant to Rule 31, would you please restore order to the chamber and have everyone maintain their seats to the edge of the floor, and I think that historically, I think, has solved the problem. I think a far more important thing would be just getting people to comply with the existing ethics. You and I exchanged an email this past week. I'm happy to see that you put a disclaimer on it, but are you familiar that you're not supposed to take a donation of $100 with anonymously? You do
Yes.
have a $100 donation in there from, I guess, a few days ago, anonymously paying for your
It
trip.
comes out publicly anonymously, but it sends,
Okay.
on the back end, it sends
Okay,
information
so
to
you'll
us.
have that
Yes.
adequately.
Yes.
The other issue is, and I had a brief conversation with the alderwoman from the 16th Ward, who's chairman of
Legislation.
Legislation Committee. And I guess they're taking up a different bill concerning ethics. I guess the alderman from the 24th is sponsored that has, I guess,
Oh, that's the
a
one with
cap
the
on donations
cap
or
on
something.
donations, yes.
Which seemed like a very high cap to me, and again, I wasn't at the hearing, but someone had told me there's only been one contribution, which sounds unusual to me, but it seemed like a very high cap if we wanted to do some sort of reform with regard to contributions. And in my conversation with the alderwoman from the 16th, she had been telling me that there's a number of ordinances that we have down here already that we're probably not in compliance with regarding trips and things like that. Evidently, when you have somebody pay for a trip,
It's a report.
you're supposed to report that. And again, I haven't done this, but she said that she went over, I guess, to the registrar's office. Is that where we're supposed to report them?
Yes, sir.
And so she said the only trips that had been reported over there was from the mayor. So, I mean, I think it's probably a number of elected officials are not in compliance with that. And frankly, I didn't even know that that ordinance was on the books, although I probably voted for it some years ago. And I think a more holistic approach would be required. I know in my other business, we have probably, in my real life, probably 8 hours a year where we actually have to go through and take ethics classes, you know, and they're part of our continuing education program. And then each year, and the reason this is so fresh in my mind, I had to do it yesterday. Each year, we have to go and answer a series of questions regarding business practices. And, you know, I spent an hour and a half yesterday morning going through, and basically each question is designed to ask you, you know, are you aware that, you know, this is an appropriate business practice, or this is an inappropriate business practice? These are our procedures to, you know, do this and do that. It takes an hour, 2 hours to go through that. And in essence, what they're doing is going through, they're finding every kind of lawsuit or every type of legal issue that happened in the industry, and then they're going to compile those questions and then kind of make you aware of it, and you end up answering each of them, and then you have to certify it. There's all electronic records on all of this. And I think probably what we need to do is go through and have a search of the ordinances that are already on file.
That's a good thing.
And then put them in a perhaps questionnaire format. And then, you know, have you filed your travel records? Have you completed your expense report? Are you aware of, you know, this campaign contribution thing and so forth? And so you get all those in one thing, you go through them, and it's part education, but it's also certification. You know, when you sign it at the bottom of the thing, you know, it's a binding thing, and it's, you know, in our case, it's a almost like a contractual relationship between, you know, the company that I work with. So, you know, whether it, you know, we have the former alderman from the 16th Ward, Jim Shrewsbury, used to do a lot of ethics legislation, and he did a number of these things over the years, and they're all kind of bouncing around out there. And and the current alderwoman from the 16th made the point, she doesn't even know it's all out there. We have some ordinances that differentiate St. Louis City campaign finance from the state. For example,
That's
I
true.
think we outlawed contributions from gambling casinos.
Yes.
And, I mean, everybody's probably wide aware of it when we actually did it, but that was a number of years ago. And so every time we do this one-off type of stuff, I think it just sets everybody up for potential embarrassment. And I'm pretty sure that there are people who are out of compliance with having trips paid for them, and I suspect that it's not anything terribly evil, but, you know, they probably weren't aware that the ordinance was out there. And again, I'm getting this kind of secondhand, and I shouldn't be speaking for the alderwoman from the 16th. But I think we ought to take a look at seeing how we're in compliance. If you haven't filed the travel thing within 30 days, I think it is. I mean, technically, you're in violation of ordinance, and you can get fined $500 and 90 days in jail. And I don't know what the statute of limitations is on that or anything else, but that might be something that, you know, we as a group have to kind of think about and deal with. So anyway, that's my idea. I think this is, this particular thing before us today, I think is a superfluous piece of legislation that should better be dealt with in the rules. And as it was, I guess, at the state level, according to, is that correct? The state?
Well, there's two. The admission into the chamber is a rule. The lobbying definitions is an actual state statute.
So we as a municipality in the state of Missouri want to go ahead and redefine, have our own definition of lobbying that's different than the state's?
No, we're updating it to ensure it is the same as the state. Now, so I can remember one example in particular during this past legislative session where we had a person sitting at a person's desk for the duration of debate on a bill. And that person was not a registered lobbyist, and therefore was allowed to be there. However, under the state definition, because that person was being paid to influence legislation, that person would have been considered a
Well,
lobbyist.
why don't we just, in our rules, say that reference the state statute then, and then we're done?
We could do that as well.
You know, it wouldn't get as much PR for everybody, but I think that was probably the more rational way of dealing with this. And that's the way we've always dealt with these things before.
Okay. Anything else, Alderman Rhodey?
No, that's it.
Okay, Alderman Kennedy?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Why an ordinance as opposed to rules change?
Did an ordinance just because the state also has a state statute defining lobbyist. And we thought that it would be easier to codify something so that that definition of lobbying isn't as easily changed as it can be with our rules. If, you know, I'm happy to do it the other way. My concern would be then, you know, coming back, you know, a year from now and we go into caucus and then we change our definitions of lobbying. So really it was just to follow what the state did in terms of, you know, their rule is the part about who can and cannot be in the chamber, but lobbying is defined in an actual codified law.
Mm-hmm. Now, you started going through one scenario that you saw while you were here. Have there been others that have, you know, gravely concerned you enough to bring this up?
That was the biggest one. I mean, the impetus for this is, you know, over the past year, I've had a number of constituents who have come and who are in the sit up in the gallery, and quite frankly, you know, a few of them had come to me and said, I'm really concerned about the number of people that I see on the floor. During civilian oversight, for example, we had police that were, you know, almost all across the back of the board. And that can be intimidating, and at the very least, but it also gives I think an optics issue of when the general public is relegated to an area where they can't have easy access to aldermen, but there are, perceived as special interests that are in very close proximity. It sends, I think, a message to the general public that perhaps their views aren't as valued, or that there's a different playing field that people have, rather, if they have the ability to hire a lobbyist versus if they don't.
And so when you're thinking then, it was a issue related to definition as opposed to just enforcement?
Correct.
Mhm.
Because I remember at the time, when the one example I cited happened, the sponsor of the bill and I went to our rules to see like how is this allowed, and the issue we found was that the person who was at a desk was not registered as a lobbyist, and so therefore there was nothing that would prohibit that person from sitting at a desk.
And
how
would
would this
change
help?
that? Yeah, that was good. And
So-
how that would,
Because this would define, because it would define the activities that person was engaged in as lobbying activities, regardless of their registration status. That it's the behavior, it's the time and the money that defines somebody as a lobbyist, regardless of what their registration status is. Because I think we see, especially at a local level, that a lot of people aren't registered as lobbyists, even if they are engaging in lobbying behavior.
and the present rule says that if they, the Board of Aldermen.
Right, that it's registered,
Registered.
yes.
Okay. All right. And so as this is written, you feel that's going to address?
I do, because again, it brings us up to the same standard as the Missouri General Assembly, which does define it based upon the time and the money that is put into influencing a piece of legislation, regardless of what the registration status is.
So then, under this, you can see it that if a person is sitting there and they begin to engage in that someone could rise up, some other person could rise up and say this person is engaging in lobbying based upon our definition and they need to be excluded from the chamber.
Talking with Tim, I think we thought that the easiest way to handle it from an enforcement piece is probably having nobody that would be really relegating the people who are on the floor to special guests. So constituents that you want to honor, somebody who's here for, when we often honor somebody with a resolution, like those are special guests. And other folks who are being, paid to spend their time to advance a particular agenda would not be allowed on the floor at all. And so it would make it, because otherwise it makes it more difficult for Tim to enforce if he's having to constantly look at who's engaging in lobbying behavior and who's not. It's easier to draw the line and say, you're just not allowed on the floor. You can be in the lobby, you can be up in the gallery, just not on the floor.
Sounds like it also, that there still needs to be, even with this, further rule changes from what you described to me. So, or could be.
There could be, yes, and I'm open to any ideas for further rule changes as well.
That's all. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Alderman Baldwin?
Thank you, Madam Chair. It scared me when we tried to do things that Jeff City does, because it's pretty screwed up there.
That's a little scary, I agree.
I'd almost rather do it as a rules change and do it as our own, just as the things that the state doesn't do properly. And hopefully the sheriff won't have any guns in his ads when he's running, the future sheriff here. But anyhow, having been down here almost, shorter time than he used to, I've never had it happen to me down here. That doesn't mean it doesn't happen to other people. It depends on how you do your things and what you want to do. is almost to the point of you're asking, does everyone have to submit their guests, 3 days beforehand and give a list? Is this going to be like a TSA thing? These people can travel here, these people cannot, situation, which means, to me, it's more of a rules thing for us, as opposed to an ordinance. It would be quicker to do as a rules change also, and it would give you immediate response, as opposed to going through all the rigmarole of having everyone vote on it, discuss it, and have some 2 or 3 hour meetings. If the rules changes, these people are allowed and these people aren't, I think as a rule, that's something we could do as a body and do quicker. And if we're supposed to be efficient, I think that would be the way to go, is what it sounds like to me, very quickly. But that's it, thank you.
Thank you, sir. And just to add to that, on occasions, I know I have seen people on the floor that shouldn't be on the floor. I've shared that with the president or one of his assistants, and they were removed. It's real simple what our rules say that we can definitely do at any given time. Alderman Vaccaro.
Well, a couple things. I'll support this if you ban cell phones, because I know that I see it where, and I've seen your guests texting you and because they'll be like, ask him this. Because the texts go back and forth, so you can have people sit, lobbyists in the gallery, texting you, well, do this or vote this way or do that. I would say that we should ban cell phones if we're gonna do it. And I would support this if we ban cell phones, because lobbyists don't have to walk up to your desk. A lobbyist can text you from a side, they can text you from the gallery, and I see, through the meeting, all the texting going back and forth. And I'll support it, but we would have to add that no cell phones. I don't bring mine in 99% of the time. I do. I've had my cell phone in there a couple times if I'm waiting for something. But if we're gonna do it, I think we ban cell phones, because, again, you can lobby from,
Up there.
easily.
And I would support that as well. I do believe that the General Assembly did institute a cell phone ban on the floor as well. I can verify that, but I think that they,
I would support it in the rules
they
on
did.
this. I think we dump the cell phones, and actually people might even pay better attention. So, anyway, that's my only thought.
Before we go to the next alderperson, I shall clarify.
I know.
A little bit more about the cell phones. That does not preclude a lobbyist from watching it live and still texting to
Right.
the person on the
I know
floor.
what I'm saying.
So whether they bring them in or not, that won't preclude that.
Right, well, no, if you don't have your phone with you.
So you want us not to be able to have our cell phones?
Right, and I'm saying that.
That's the way it is in Congress, I think Congress.
yeah,
I know
and
that.
I think the
I'm just
General
saying,
Assembly
they
does
do.
too.
So the lobbyists can text you, from watching.
From
it on
anywhere.
Anywhere.
They could be out of town on the
I
beach
understand.
and watch it live and
I
still text
understand,
you.
but what I'm saying is I'll support this if we ban the cell phones in there. Because again, a lobbyist can be anywhere and still text you, this is important to us, or ask them this question, or whatever. I don't think, for me to support this, because the lobbyist sitting on the side, nobody's ever walked up to me. Maybe I'm not that important, but nobody's ever walked up to my desk. Other
No one's ever
aldermen
walked up
do.
to my desk.
Right, other aldermen do, and I've walked up to other aldermen's desks.
No lobbyists, no.
But I've never had a lobbyist walk up to me, but I say, we're not separating ourselves from the lobbyists if our cell phones are in there, if we're allowed to be receiving texts.
Would you also want to ban your computers, tablets, and all that? Because they can still use that and communicate.
Well, you can email you, but.
Right.
I mean, the quickest way is always
No,
been
it's
just
not.
a text.
No. The more comprehensive way is to use your laptop.
Well,
Because you only have so many characters, and it gets cumbersome trying to text a
well,
message.
if the idea is to.
I just want to put it down as a consideration.
Well, I think I'm fine with just the cell phones.
You're fine with just the cell phones, but not the laptops.
Yeah, I'm fine with
Okay.
just the cell phones. I really
Okay.
believe that would stop the instant, Because again, lobbyists aren't coming to me from the sides. If anybody's gonna try and talk to me during the meeting, it's gonna be by way of a text or something, you know.
All right, well, I took that note. Alderwoman Engrossia,
I have no questions.
okay. Alderman Ogilvie,
Thank you, Madam Chair. I hope if I ever make it to the beach again, I'm not watching the Board of Aldermen streaming live. I mean, my name's on the bill. I support the bill. I mean, personally, I have had the experience of actually talking about a bill that was about to get a vote and having a lobbyist literally on the floor of the Board of Aldermen telling people to vote against the bill. It's been a couple years ago.
they got up out of their seat and went to people's desks?
Yes.
Oh, that's horrible.
Then I think that shows that we're not really enforcing the rules we have. And I think that type of behavior shows a real disrespect for the Board of Aldermen in general. I think that we really are operating kind of pretty far outside the norm. If that type of thing would just, it would never happen in the state legislature. It would never happen in the county council. You know, I can't imagine a lobbyist walking up to the front of the county council and going around the back of the desks to talk to somebody. It just doesn't happen because they don't allow it to happen. And I think we can do the same thing and operate in the same way. I also think, I don't think this was intentional, but we've evolved this system where we end up introducing all the lobbyists at the beginning of every meeting, which is a strange custom that I think it's an accidental custom, but I think to sort of the casual observer of the Board of Aldermen to understand we begin every meeting saying hello to the lobbyist, it's just, we don't have to do that, right? If the lobbyists were not there on the floor, we would not have to introduce them, and we could, I think, get rid of this accidental custom that does not necessarily reflect well on the body as a whole. So, and I say that, I mean, I'm friends with lobbyists. I don't have any ill will towards most of these people. They're doing a job, and that's great. I just don't think that job has to extend to the floor, right? It can happen up to 9:59 on Fridays, and then it can start again after the meeting adjourns. But I think that meeting, that's kind of where it becomes our role to figure out what to do, not lobbyists' role to influence us at that point. So thank you.
Thank you, and just to share a couple of thoughts on that very quickly, I can kind of agree with the introduction part. As you all know, it's very rare I introduce anybody, but I think that was put in place in order to assure that those persons were supposed to be on the floor, that they were a guest of someone in the body. But I've been a part of other entities, and what we do is people that are approved to be in a specific space, they have to wear a badge that could eliminate the introductions, because if they don't have a badge on the floor, then they don't get in. And the instance that you just shared with us about someone walking to someone's desk, I really wish you had asked for a point of order and had them removed from the chambers.
I did.
And they were removed.
I did,
remember
but
it.
why does it have to get to that point? Is my
Oh, some people, no
yeah.
matter what your rules or regulations are, they're gonna be out of order. So even if we pass this with 10 other pages attached to it, somebody's gonna be out of order at some point, and you would have to have them removed.
Yeah.
Or something, you know. So I understand that we do have to do those things sometimes, and I'm glad that you did ask for them to be removed. But that's another way, and again, we could do that with rules. We could just change the rules, get rid of the introductions, have a point of identification if someone's supposed to be on the floor. And as you all know, any corporate building you go into, if you're a visitor, you've got to sign in, you've got to get a little thing to put on. If you're walking around without it, you're gonna get put out. So, it's real simple. We can handle that. Alderwoman Cruzen, I kind of missed you over there.
No, I don't have any questions.
You don't have any questions? Okay.
Except I am using my cell phone.
You're in trouble. Well, you know, my problem is, we have a lot of work to do, and I'm moving things while I'm sitting there in session, and to be without it would be kind of hard, then that means I gotta lug around a laptop that's okay for me to have at my desk. So, we shall see. I am glad that we took this moment to have this conversation. As I shared with you, I'm not taking a vote today, but we have a number of things that were brought up that I believe has further consideration to it. I think the main thing that I heard from all those who have most of those who have spoken, is that we might be able to handle this better through just simply having rule changes. But in the meantime, I think it's important that you digest the information that was forwarded to you today. If you think that there's something else that you need to look at, if you need to refresh your memory on rules, I think we should do that too. And I think that as we search for the answers to this, our next meeting is going to be very, very fruitful, and I think we'll be able to come to a good conclusion. Okay? So I'd like to ask you to close for today, Alderwoman Green, and we shall move on to the next topic on the agenda.
Just appreciate your time, and if you have any questions or comments, I'll send the one document that I didn't send, but please forward questions or comments my way, and I'm happy to work on a committee substitute or whichever way we decide to move forward.
Okay, thank you so much.
Sure, if I
Excuse me.
could, just one question before we leave the subject. The Alderman from the 24th comments kind of began. Alderman, you said that when it happened before, you raised the point of order and it was addressed. I don't see anything in here with a penalty clause, so I'm not really sure how this is gonna do anything more than what
We already do.
we already do. Does it? I mean.
Well, it's because they're not allowed there in the first place, so if they can't be on the floor of the board in the first place, then it makes
I
it
guess
so it
some of this
doesn't
might be
happen.
definition. I've always been fuzzy about this. Do we consider the floor sitting off to the side of the chamber, or do we consider
Yes.
walking in amongst because this has never been that big of a problem for me. I've never, I don't really.
Well,
care
the definition can be your choice, I assume. But anytime you walk inside the door, that is the chambers, that is the floor. The other part to this too is there is a lot of confusion about how things happen down here, and we tend sometimes to relate that to our best benefit at that time. So do we explain very clearly that anyone can be our guest on the floor? All we have to do is say yes for it. So no one has, anyone, and this is why when the statement was made about someone feeling different, lesser, or whatever, you just request from your alderperson that you'd like to be their guest, and you'll be on the floor. That's a real simple thing. And then the other part to that too is a lot of the lobbyists who are here, these are individuals who, and I went through my head very quickly, and a lot of them have not had any bills before us in years, but that's their job to be here every Friday. I know when I was president of the Board of Aldermen, I had someone assigned to be here every Friday. That was their job, but I didn't have any bills before you. But that's their job, just to know what's going on.
Well, I guess my point is what frankly bothers me isn't people being off to the side, it's them being out, out in the middle, sitting at people's chairs and stuff like that, or at their desk. And I don't go up to Jeff City often,
But that's not something we normally do. We don't have lobbyists sitting at our desk.
well, we don't even, I don't think in Jeff City, they have that, I've only been up there a few times, but they have, I guess, the pillars off to the side of the chambers. And I think sometimes people can sit there, but if they ever step beyond the pillars, and I'm talking about family, friends and stuff, I think they may have like, a ceremonial day at the beginning where they, they create the exception. But I think they have a state trooper stationed in the chamber.
Right.
And if
it could be
you
very
take a
serious.
step across the threshold of the, I don't know if you call it the ante room or whatever, off to the side, if you take a step beyond that, there's a state trooper up there, and they'll have you forcibly removed right then and there. So I always thought that when we talk about the floor, it's actually getting out onto where the aldermen have their desk, and I guess that's, you know, we don't have as clearly delineated as they do in Jeff City, but, you know,
Can I add to that really quickly? Some of us, it doesn't affect most of us, but where my desk is, the lobbyists are literally right there.
Do they talk to you and bother you?
They don't bother me, no.
No, but I
I'm
want to
just
know, are
saying,
they
like, it's-
communicating with you, because they shouldn't be?
Right, well, I had it happen when we were debating minimum wage, that somebody got up off the floor to let another alderman know about a rule that he could use to stop what I was doing, and I don't think that's, you know, I think, and because they're so close, it happened so fast, I didn't have time to make a point of order.
Okay. I got a remedy for that too. I think it can happen with a rules change, I really do. I got a good remedy for that.
I think my only
yeah.
concern about that, and I'm fine with a rule change, we're not enforcing the rules that we currently have. And so I don't know if an ordinance puts more pressure on us to enforce it or not.
won't.
It might not.
we have ordinances
But
that we can enforce.
It,
Probably about 50% or more.
so I would ask that as we move forward, we really look at that enforcement piece. Because we often don't, I think, follow the rules that are in place with regard to this at the moment.
I can say very honestly that I've had concerns about safety and all kinds of things as we have gone through different things here at the Board of Aldermen. So I think one of the most important things for us to do is to address our rules and to also address just the format of process and procedure and what is required for us to do our job when we're here. Just very recently, I think just this year, I think we finally got the adequate number of security people here. Because before, we were lucky if we had one. And then you've got people everywhere, all around you, and anything could happen. So we have a number of things that we could address that I think if we treated ourselves better, and we've gone through this before, especially me complaining, that we can make some things better. And your rules are there for a reason. The rules are easier for us to enforce. When you have an ordinance, then you more likely would have to deal with somebody trying to sue you if they don't like it. And it's not going to change whether or not it's really enforced. We don't necessarily enforce all of the ordinances that we have on the books now, whether it's dealing with crime or anything else. So I would really like to have a chance to look at this a little bit closer, read the information that's before me, and I'd like to ask the balance of the committee people to do the same. And we'll come back and address this later.
Thank you.
All
Appreciate
right.
your time.
Thank you. Our next item on the agenda is, what is it? There it is. We're going to be, yeah, we can pass those out. So the next item on the agenda is resolution number 207. And for those of you who have forgotten, because it's been a moment since this was sent out to committee. It was passed last session, that's true. So, we had a number of alderpersons who supported this resolution, and I think that it's important for us to move forward on action with this. I think it's very crucial. And what I'd like to do is to start off, I'd like to read the resolution if you don't mind. I think it's important to read it into record.
May I get the presenter now, or you want me?
Oh, Phil, oh,
I
yes,
think it's on the
please.
other side with Terrence, they're trying to get the.
Okay, there's Terrence right there.
Let me,
All right. So, I'd like to read the resolution into record so that we can have an up-to-date understanding of what our task is before us. So resolution number 207, whereas the city of St. Louis is a multi-racial and cultural community enriched by its diversity, and I'm going to leave out the whereas, despite its racial, ethnic, and cultural richness, racial disparities exist. and such disparities have been cited and specified in numerous local studies, including the North St. Louis Health Access Studies spearheaded by African American aldermen in conjunction with Barnes Jewish Hospital and BJC Healthcare, released in 2008. The City of St. Louis Health Assessment Report, released in 2012 by the City Health Department. For the Sake of All report issued in 2014, and the 2-volume City of St. Louis Disparity Study related to minority and women business enterprises and workforce released in 2015. And the Ferguson Commission was established by Missouri Governor Jay Nixon to look into the underlying issues behind the 2014 civil unrest throughout the St. Louis region, sparked by the shooting death of Michael Brown. And the Ferguson Commission released a report in 2015 entitled Forward Through Ferguson, A Path to Racial Equity. That confirms that racial disparities exist in numerous municipalities throughout the St. Louis area, and that these disparities are at the core of many of the area's social, economic, political, and educational challenges. And the Ferguson Commission report makes a call to action to help eliminate racial disparities, recommending that various types of bodies throughout the region create and implement a racial equity lens, framework, process, structure, and/or procedure as a way to eliminate racial disparities, causing these bodies to regularly, procedurally consider the racial impact of their actions and the impact of their actions upon racial disparities. And there have been a diversity of approaches toward ending racial disparities enacted in various municipalities throughout the country, including several municipalities creating administrative offices and/or standing committees of their legislative bodies related to ensuring racial equity. And the importance of this issue toward improving the region and the City of St. Louis in particular merits a review and discussion by this Honorable Board of Aldermen. And so it is. Now, giving you just a framework of where we are, we have a lot of work that's been done by this body for various reasons. And I think that this resolution is very timely. I think it is appropriate that we bring a lot of this work to the forefront. I think we need to examine how it should be used to get us to the point of providing some more comprehensive opportunities for us to influence the quality of life in this city by how we expend funds, how we enact ordinances and rules and regulations, and how those bodies that service this city of St. Louis operate in the future. So it is with pleasure for me to have the opportunity to sit here today and start this process. Alderman Kennedy is, a lot of people know, that's my war horse, that's my king. So we work well together on many, many issues around the city over the last 30 years or so. And I'm unfortunately one of those people who's not afraid to say what needs to be said, and I'm not afraid to do hard work. But he carries the ball for us on many, many occasions, and he's working on our behalf when we don't even know it. So Alderman Kennedy, I would like for you to introduce our guest speaker today, who is going to help us understand where we are moving towards and what we're planning to do, and how we might approach it in its beginning stages. Alderman.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Is it okay if I sit over here?
Absolutely. It's okay.
I guess we'll all do that.
Okay.
As Resolution 207 points out, it directs this committee to hold hearings to look at the possibility, understanding the concept of the creation of a racial equity lens for the city of St. Louis. We know down through the years there have been a number of attempts to address the issue of racial disparity in the city of St. Louis, including the creation of minority and women business enterprise goals as it relates to their involvement in contracts in the city, the workforce bill, and a number of things that have been enacted down through the years to begin to address this. However, there's been no overarching or really comprehensive approach to the whole issue of racial disparity in the city of St. Louis that has been well established, exists from a number of reports as cited in the resolution itself. In fact, the health report, access report that was issued in 2008 said that if you lived in the north side zip codes, your access to health care was like living in a third world country. There was only one dentist office or private dentist office. There was only 2 family practitioners in North St. Louis, and if it was not for the federally qualified health clinics, it would really be a health desert. And so then there are clearly disparities in the city. The Ferguson report really made a call for municipalities and for private institutions to look at ways that they could begin to address these health disparities. And one of those it pushed forward was the creation of a health disparity or health equity lens. And so we have some renowned people in the city of St. Louis. Sometimes when you sit here with the folks and you deal with them every day, they're not as important as they stand nationally. And one of those individuals, at least in your mind, one of those individuals is here with us today. They had the opportunity to sit in several workshops that talked about creation of racial equity lens throughout the country, and these individuals who come from out of the country cite the individual that is sitting on the end of this table as one of the pioneers in that direction. And we simply know him as, Brother Khatib, who I first met in the in the 70s when we were sending paper plates to Reagan when they were cutting the early childhood food program. And we sent paper plates to point out to Reagan that people are still hungry. That's a little while ago, but my point is that he has been involved in dealing with issues of racial equity before it was coined as a term and has become popular. He himself in 2011 created an institute, the Racial Equity Learning Exchange, which creates sessions in helping people to understand this concept of racial equity and the frameworks and lens thereof. I'm trying to speak long enough to make sure they got the technicalities over there. So this will be a smooth transition.
Maybe I can ask the question or take up some time if that's all right.
Sure.
Yeah, sure.
I'm just trying to figure out from where we are, where we're,
Trying to go.
yeah, is there like a flow chart? Because is health going to be one of a series of topics that we're going to talk about, or?
Well, today is just getting the foundation of
To
understanding.
help us get a foundation of process in place.
Okay, so
Yes.
this is kind of beginning, trying to figure out what the flow chart is today.
Absolutely, because we realize that.
But it's not necessarily on health. We're
No.
No.
talking about
No.
a number
of things.
different issues, whether it's
Mhm.
economics, parity, or equality,
Mhm.
So he's speaking about
disparity.
the overarching concepts. That's what his presentation will be about here today. And so you have his little background on Khatib Waheed
Did I
before
pass
you.
this around to everybody?
Many of us know him as a part of the Walbridge Plan Community Program that he helped initiate that was highly successful in Walnut Park. And since then, he's moved on to bigger and better things. I believe he's already in it. So what he will do here today is to give us a foundation and set the framework by which to understand the both concept of the racial equity lens, racial equity, racial justice, and a number of other coined phrases that have been put out there so that we can all be speaking from the same language and perspective.
Okay. Can we just take like a minute break here? I want to make sure that technical things are taken care of. Okay, so go right ahead.
So let me start with the words of peace and to each of you and to say good morning, and certainly I want to thank Alderwoman Davis and Alderman McKinley for inviting me here today, and all of you who are aldermen and alderwomen and other distinguished guests, giving me an opportunity to kind of share this concept that has been actually evolving over the last decade and a half, most recently. So as Alderman Kennedy mentioned, I started doing some of this work in the early 2000s, actually in 1999, with the Aspen Institute on Comprehensive Community Initiatives up in New York. And at that time, if you reflect on it, conversations about race that squarely placed race at the center of the table weren't likely to happen. It was a word that would tend to shut down conversations. And so it would bring up a lot of feelings and other kinds of things. And so we were still using the terminology cultural competence. But we began to develop this definition called structural racism, which really looks more at unintended consequences of how institutions and systems operate in a way to create disadvantage for people of color. And along the way, we also began to develop this language around equity. And fast forwarded it, in 2002 or 2003, I began working at the national level with a couple of foundations who had begun to recognize that there were disparities in child welfare. And the juvenile justice system had already begun to explore that. And it was at that level that we actually began to introduce this concept of equity. Fast forwarded on to date, one of our hopes is that we can create space here in St. Louis for individuals and organizations and agencies to really understand what equity is. Because you hear people use the terminology, we can use it in a sentence, but it's more than just using it in a sentence. And equity and equality aren't the same. And so I want to get into some fundamentals around some of this work. And I want to apologize for this. My PowerPoint slide is set up for 2010, and the city systems won't accept that. So we weren't able to convert it to the way the systems are operating. And so Terrence was brilliant enough to at least get it to come up as a PDF, but as a result, some of the words will be somewhat cut off, but we'll try to go with it. And I could have just done an oral presentation, but for the benefit of those of y'all who are visual learners, I thought it might be useful to do both. So today's objectives really are three. First, I want to briefly describe what a racial equity framework is and its basic components. And then I want to talk briefly about some of the racial equity tools that are used to help advance racial equity within and across systems. And then review some, if time allows, review some basic definitions and concepts that are fundamental to this body of work. So as a framework, this is really not only a tool, but it's a process and a set of strategies that in effect says that you will look explicitly at how decisions and organizational culture, how policy and practice will impact communities of color. It's not an elephant in the room kind of conversation. It is a deliberate effort to look at policy, to look at practice, to look at culture in a way that asks the question, how will this impact communities of color? And will it improve outcomes? Will it maintain as they are, or will it make them worse? And of course, I'll talk a little bit more about what's important to get that done. But then the purpose of it is, you're promoting and devising a set of goals and implementing a set of strategies that are designed to achieve equity. And of course, if we don't know what equity is, if we're not all in agreement about what equity looks like, then we're talking at each other and not with each other in a way that's helpful. So in terms of goals, ultimately, it is about ensuring the safe reduction of disparities across racial and ethnic groups and improving outcomes for all people. So this is not about, when we bring up the words race, a lot of thoughts and feelings and emotions come up for us. And often they're not very pleasant. We don't do as good a job as I think we could talking about race for a number of reasons, and I'm not here to judge. This is not about finger pointing, this is not about blaming, this is not about trying to make people feel guilty or shame. It is about trying to find solutions, and it is about recognizing that data suggests very strongly that we still have not come as far as we like to think that we've come. That even though we've dismantled Jim Crow laws, the legacy of Jim Crow still creates this huge disparity in terms of opportunity and outcomes on the basis of color. And the aversion to talking about race and why that is makes it difficult to resolve. And so this whole concept is about being able to put those issues squarely on the table. Now, these are the basic components of an equity framework. It starts with data. And so we're talking about not only data within your systems or your departments, but across systems and departments. So if there's a history of disparity, and if there's current evidence of disparity within the data, then that suggests that there may be a real benefit in looking at these issues through an equity lens. And so lens means just that. It's, imagine a microscope, and what we can see looking through the microscope that we can't see with the naked eye. It enhances our ability to see things that are there, that are important, but that are not visibly observable. And so a quote that I like to start off with sometime by Mahatma Gandhi asks, it says basically, only when a person's welfare means more to you than your own, can you say you love. And anything else is just business give and take. And so that gives us an opportunity to invite others and you to think about, to what extent does race impact whether or not we can care about somebody else's welfare, or somebody's gender, or somebody's age or ability group, or sexual orientation, or religion, or nationality, or language? To what extent do those things prevent us from caring as much or more about someone else as we do our own? And if we can't get past those and we're not judging, then it's just business give and take. It is the way we've always operated. The second part of that quote suggests that this is head and heart work. It's not enough just to be smart. It's not enough just to know the issues. It's not enough just to know the data. It's also important to view it from a perspective of compassion and what is fair and just and right. And that is essential to this equity framework. So you start looking at the data within health, or you look at data within education, or you look at data within child welfare, or juvenile justice, or law enforcement, or housing, or employment and unemployment, and you begin to discover that there are disparities in terms of outcomes on the basis of race. And then from there you go to the second step here, which is the structural racism analysis, where you begin to look deliberately at policies and practices and organizational culture. And where we sometimes miss the boat is that when we look at policies, we're looking at it from the Jim Crow lens. We're looking for the words race that deliberately suggest and connote that there's discrimination there. And you won't find them now. We've moved past that as a nation. We've gotten more sophisticated about that. People are paying more attention to that, and there are many well-intended folks who are trying to do the right thing. But our systems may not have caught up. Systems don't change very readily. And so, taking a look at for example, we've got the Anti-Drug Act of 1986 that was passed that said that if you were caught with 5 grams of rock cocaine, you get a mandatory 5-year sentence, and states actually impose stiffer sentence up to 10. There was nothing in that policy about race. It was very race neutral. But the way it was applied, the way we view crime, the way we target resources to address crime had a disproportionate and disparate impact on communities of color. We've gone from 300,000 people in prison in 1970 to 2.2 million in 2012. We've got another 6.6 million who are on probation and parole. We have 500,000 people who are in prison for substance use. We've got close to 150,000 women who are in prison. And over 60% of the people in prison are people of color. So we understand that law enforcement can't resolve all crimes, so it has to be targeted. But what's the basis of that targeting? So if we say more crimes are committed in those areas, why is that? And one of the places that we encourage people to begin to look is around this issue of housing. Because most of us hear quite often that education is the pathway out. And it is an important part of that. But in this country, historically, a person's race is determined where they live on the basis of racial policy. And where one lives determines the value of their property. A house in North St. Louis and Baden that looks exactly like one on the hill is not worth nearly as much because of who lives there and where it's located. And that's on the basis of racial policy. And then, of course, local funds, tax dollars, property taxes fund schools. And so the value of property and who lives there drives the quality of the education and how it prepares people to become productive citizens. And then that in turn influences tax dollars for infrastructure and for municipal services, and in turn leads to questions about health and physical health and mental health needs and well-being. And so if we ignore the basic premise that where one lives is based on one's race and that how everything tends to flow from that, then it's easy for us to say, well, it's really not about racism. When in reality it still is, because it's a part of that legacy. Am I making sense here? Okay. And so we start applying this structural racism analysis to the data, and data is not just numbers. And what we're suggesting here is that this work is not data driven, it is data informed, which to me is different, because data driven kind of suggests that you're worshiping data, that the data is perfect, and the danger is that you can manipulate data. You can say, okay, well, I'll just stop bringing kids of color in child welfare at a higher rate and reduce it to a lower rate, and we can get the numbers down. And the people of those jurisdictions can say, now we've got the numbers to show the disparities are gone. But is that the best thing to do? Is that good for kids? And so I would suggest that it is about safe reductions in disparities, not just a wholesale cutting towards that on the basis of numbers. And then this third part is about conducting the benefits and burdens analysis, which basically is about asking the question, who's deserving and who's not? Who deserves to get benefit from our tax dollars and who doesn't? And to what extent does that have to do with anything about race? Are we saying through our policies that, you know, we've heard sometimes, I'm using these examples that may not resonate with you, but they may be illustrative. We spend roughly about $21 billion a year on higher ed. We spend $70 billion on criminal justice and prisons. And so I've been in conversations with people throughout the state of New York and other places when we're doing this work around child welfare, and I've heard some people very honestly say, well, I don't want prisoners getting GEDs and getting trauma-informed services when I'm not getting help with my child's post-secondary education. Nobody's helping me with my tuition. And it kind of creates a bifurcation, an either or, as opposed to asking, why can't we do both? How are our policies designed in such a way that it pits two specific groups who have specific needs against each other? Understanding that when people leave prison and they come back to the community, if they've not received trauma-informed services, if they've not healed, even if they don't get caught, they can commit crimes and they can create terror in our communities and in our households. And so making sure that folks who need those services are getting them regardless of what our perceptions are about whether or not they deserve it is important. Another quick example on this benefit and burdens piece is when those 20 children were slaughtered at Sandy Hook in Newtown back in December of 2013. Our nation responded overwhelmingly in an appropriate way. Legislators, executive members of Congress and at the state and federal level, law enforcement officers, mental health providers, parents, families, and communities came to the aid of those children and families, and they should. And they should, to support those children and the families of those 6 adults who were slaughtered. Why isn't that happening in the black community? We've had 188 murders last year. We saw pockets of protests and prayer vigils, but we don't see the same kind of response. How are our systems responding to the needs of children and families of color? And to what extent, if any, does it have to do with race? And an equity framework invites us to look at that. And then, of course, once we began to look at those things, then we started thinking about, so how is the approach different? How do we behave in a way that's culturally competent and culturally sensitive? Will, in other words, those intended consumers of services actually want to use them? You know, I think about a 7-Eleven store that's in some isolated place that may be accessible, but not isolated in the sense of geography, but isolated in the sense of what it offers. So it's well lit, it's on the corner, it's on the bus stop, and people say, yes, it's accessible. It's even got a parking lot. But when you go inside, are the floors clean? Is there a plexiglass shield between the person who's behind the counter at the clerk and the customer? Can you write your name or some obscene message on the top of a can of beans because there's so much dust on there that it's easy to do that? Does it provide healthy foods, or are all the juices made from concentrate with high contents of sugar? And how does that affect child and brain development? And do we see those same kinds of things in communities that are not poor? So when we tend to still do housing policy in terms of real estate agents, appraisers, lenders, and so forth, we still continue to steer people in certain directions. I've got neighbors on my block, I'm 2 blocks from like Crusen's ward, 2 blocks north of Delmar, and I've got friends on that block who are white who said, Khatib, you know, we had a hard time moving over here because the real estate people told us, you don't want to move over there. You don't want to be around those people. You don't want to send your kids to those schools. That still happens. But he and his wife were determined to live in a racially and ethnically diverse community. And I applaud him for that. But the thing is that that kind of behavior still happens. And we all know that north of Delmar, I don't have to tell you that story, that has a lot to do with how banks have lent or not loaned money. And we're now seeing, not just in St. Louis, but around the country, this process of gentrification, where unfortunately in some places, the two communities, the new ones and the old ones, don't have the language, don't have the tools, don't have the space to have a conversation about what are the mutual benefits of living in the same geographic space as neighbors and friends and not just people who live next door to each other. And so, do we make the investment so that those communities look like that? And when we don't, we begin to discover that through this benefit and burdens analysis and cultural competence. And then lastly, monitoring outcomes. It's not enough to just say we want to achieve equity. It really means that we're monitoring that. How do we know equity when we see it? What does it look like? So those are the components. And then the tools, these are 3 of the tools that I use. And the first one, Alderman Kennedy referred to, racial equity learning exchanges. These are not trainings. It is about learning. It is about creating space for people to be who they are without judgment, to feel that they're not coming in there and feeling like they should know everything about these issues in order to participate, right? And it's designed to build individual and organizational capacity to have ongoing conversations about the intersections of race, disparities, and the need for multi-systemic reform. So we use a number of tools, including data and audio visuals and a lot of dyads in small groups. My point on this one is that it's not enough for just the leadership to say, okay, we're going to embrace an equity lens. If your department has not gone through some opportunity where you are normalizing conversations about race, okay, then you won't get the same answers. You won't get the same results. You won't get the same buy-in. And so it takes leadership to say this is a priority, but leadership can't move it by itself. So these learning exchanges create opportunities for us to identify and challenge some of our assumptions, our biases, our stereotypes, our commissions around issues of race. But it starts by looking at systemic as opposed to individual behaviors. And I think that's a place that, from a methodological approach, where we get stuck. We start off talking about people's individual beliefs, and nobody wants to be perceived or accused of having racist attitudes. It's not helpful. Where we start is looking at how systems operate, how they respond to the needs of children and families of color, using data, using policy to help people examine things from a different perspective. So that's what that does. And then the second tool is the structural racism theory of change. It's a backwards mapping logic model that starts with a long-term goal around achieving equity. It has to be doable, it has to be easy to communicate, it has to be comprehensive, and of all, it must be measurable. And in the design of that long-term goal then comes 4 other key steps in terms of deconstructing what that means, talking about what needs to be in place in order for it to happen, what are the barriers that are preventing it from happening right now, what strategies will be used to lower those barriers, and then assessing capacity to accomplish it. But if you're not comfortable talking about race, then it's hard to get to that place. If we're sitting there in the rooms well-intended, but we're cringing every time the word race and racism is brought up, then we just have more work to do. It doesn't mean people are bad people. It doesn't mean that they aren't committed. It doesn't mean that they don't care. It means that more time needs to be invested in deepening the understanding of how these issues intersect and how Jim Crow, the dismantling of Jim Crow, was necessary but not sufficient to reduce disparities and achieve equality and equity in our community. And then the third strategy is about what some people call training of trainers. And that is identifying a group of individuals who not only with whom these ideas resonate, but who can present, who can facilitate the conversations in an ongoing basis within and across those agencies, or within and across those departments, or within and across those organizations, so that there's a constant effort to be inclusive and to bring more people to the table. So when, and unfortunately, can you move that just a wee bit over to the right? When we're approaching issues about disparity, and is it where you can lift it up just a wee bit? I apologize for this. Can you go a little bit more to your right? Just a wee bit. Yeah. So, yeah. So when we're not using an equity framework and we're not using the structural racism analysis to figure out why disparities are so embedded, these are 4 of the type of things that we typically consider: family factors, poverty and social factors, legal access, and education. What do you notice about all 4 of those circles in terms of size? They're pretty equal in size, right? What about the relationship of those circles? They're intertwined, they're interconnected, they overlap. Well, you know, this, you can't even see this one, so in some respects, it's even more powerful that this thing isn't working the way I want. This one says race. So when we're not using equity as a framework and looking at policies through a structural racism lens, these are the ones that we focus on. And when this one comes up, we got a special project, got special funding, or there's been some event that has brought the issue to the table. But what I would say to you about those events, like the untimely death of Mike Brown and the unrest that ensued, and then the violence and all the other things that subsequently occurred, it is important at that time to have conversations about race, but it is not the best time. It is not the best time to begin having conversations about race and equity and disparities, primarily because folks' emotions are running high. They usually don't have common language and context and lived experience, and so individuals are more interested in being heard than listening. And the discussants in those situations end up walking away feeling very frustrated about conversations about race, often committing to never doing it again. Okay? Which is one of the reasons why we just don't do it well as a nation or as a community. Now, on the other hand, if we do use equity as a framework, and we are looking at policies around how it impacts race, it looks more like this. What can you do the shimmy with it one more time? Going the wrong way. One more. Yes. So you kind of get the idea. All 5 circles are there now. What do you notice about them?
Oh, race is in the middle.
Race is in the middle. What else do you notice? They're the same
Same
size
size.
on it. What that implies is that it's not always about race. There are these other issues, and they need to be attended to. But the point is that given the data, given our history, given the lived experience, race should be more central to the conversation than it was on that previous slide. Okay? Are we frozen? So just some quick definitions. How much time more time do I have?
Honestly, only about 5 more minutes.
5 more minutes? Okay, let me do the definition. I think that'll be most key.
Okay.
Can you do that? Okay. So the one before it. So equality and equity are terms that are often used synonymously. And in our body of work, in our framework, they're similar, but they're not the same. They're like handmaidens, hand in glove. Equality is a process, and it should be transformative within and across systems that works to undo past discrimination in policy and economics and culture and so forth. More specifically, it is about ensuring that people really have fair access to what society considers its most important opportunity structures, namely housing, education, employment, health, and wealth, and well-being. And those opportunities should be there in spite of a person's race or ethnicity or nationality or religion or language or sexual orientation or ability group or age or gender. So many of us would like to believe, and very sincerely, that because the Jim Crow laws have been dismantled, we have equality. So equality has to be measurable. Go to the next one. So equity is the metric and framework for equality. How do you know that you have equality unless you have a way of measuring it, right? And so that's what equity is. It is a social outcomes measure. That when we figure out how we're going to allocate resources, tax dollars and so forth, when we think about who's going to pay for it and who's going to benefit from it, and when we examine good and bad outcomes, then those should not be predictable by race. It should be random. Let me say that again. Resource allocation, assessments about who's deserving and who's not, who's going to pay for it, the outcomes that result from not outputs but outcomes. Those should be random, not predictable by race. And if we look across a host of dimensions, you've already cited 4 major reports that have been done here in St. Louis. The one by Focus St. Louis in '89, and then, Confluence in '89, and Focus in 2000, and Forsake of All in 2014, and then the Ferguson Commission report. We've had 4 really seminal reports on race and inequity and inequality in this region that clearly are data informed. But we've not created space for us to examine what that means for us as a region and how we can be an even stronger region if we had the capacity, which is the will and the skills and the resources to put race squarely in the middle of a conversation to figure out why do these outcomes keep looking the way that they always do. So if you have poverty, it should be just as likely that a white kid is poor as it is a black kid or a Latino kid or an Asian
Poor is
kid.
poor, that's right.
If you're going to have involvement with child welfare or juvenile justice or the criminal justice system, it should be just as likely that a white kid is involved with those systems at a proportionate rate as any other racial ethnic group. If you have a black child that's going to become a millionaire, it should be just as likely that white and brown and native and other kids and families achieve that same equality. And when we look at the data, it is clearly predictable by race. Next slide. And then structural racism is the many factors that work together to produce these inequities and perpetuate hierarchies. And we look at policy and practice and so forth. Hit it again. So there are different levels or types of racism. Can you hit it again? Oh, it does. It's not working. Okay. Keep forward. I've got some national data and some comparative local data that time will not allow us to cover that explicates even more how these disparities look. But I want to get to the other framework so that we can then answer any questions. Keep going, and I'll tell you. Keep going. This. Go back. So, a lot of people say, okay, so we know the disparity data, so what? It looks the way we thought it would look. What's up with that? There are at least two dominant ways that policy reacts, research informs, and agencies respond to this data. To explain it. One framework says that poverty is not caused by structural factors related to race and class, but instead it is caused by family dysfunction and cultural pathology and lawlessness, particularly in the black community. And the causation is it says that black poverty is an adaptation to poverty and a relative to character failures. In other words, there's something wrong with those people. Okay? And so the response should be, we must restore law and order, implement a war on drugs, which means punishing addictions, resisting the civil rights legislation, and the anti-poverty programs. That's one framework that explains or attempts to explain why we have racial disparities. Okay? Next one. The other framework says that poverty is caused by structural and historic factors related to race and class and ethnicity. And that the root causes of criminal behavior in black communities and others come from poverty created by racial and class biases. And the response, restore law and order by implementing civil rights legislation, anti-poverty programs, war on poverty, and more substance abuse services. Which one of those two do we most often hear? The one that says there's something wrong with those people, their character failings, or the second one that says something's wrong with how our systems respond? Anybody hear the second one more often than the first? Okay, so that narrative informs public policy. That narrative informs how we respond to the needs of children and families of color. And without something to balance that, to bring that in more perspective, we keep race off the table because it's understood that there's something wrong with them and we need to fix those people rather than fixing the situation in which they live as a result of racial policy. Now this is really important, folks, to grasp. And as stuff comes up for you, even as you hear this, I'm not bringing it up to make you angry or to feel shame or guilt. None of those things, while they're understandable, that's not the purpose. The purpose here is to say, this is how much this is in the DNA of our society. This is how much, even when we don't think it explicitly, it is there implicitly. Particularly when we're angry, when we're tired, when we're hungry, or when we're making decisions about, do I have to give up something or do I think I have to give up something in order for somebody else to get something? This is not about, for me, redistributing wealth. I can't even say it, it's so much not about what I'm. It is about redistributing opportunities. And so I would submit that it's both of these. I'm not going to stand up here and tell you that there aren't some people who do bad things in all communities. But it is so easy for us to rely on that as an explanation that we never even get to these systemic issues. You hear it even in boardrooms, you hear it in programs that say, well, you know, the parents just don't value education. You know, parents are just gonna abuse their kids. They don't wanna clean up their property. They tear up things, da-da-da-da-da. I'm not gonna utter any more of those stereotypes because I don't want to put any ideas in your head. But y'all know what I'm talking about. And so this is part of the framing that we think is needed to really understand how to achieve equity in this region. Department by department, system by system, program by program. So let me just stop there and see Alderwoman Davis or Alderman Kennedy or Alderwoman Newsom. Anyone have any questions?
I wanted to, first of all, before we get to the questions, just thank you because sometimes we need to hear it back, even though we know it, and sometimes we're even trying to address it, but to hear it back is very important, and you did an excellent job on bringing some points to the forefront for us to consider. I wanted to take a moment to allow anyone who has.
The camera guy's trying to ask us a question.
Oh, he's turned the lights up. Okay. I wanted to take a moment to allow everyone to take a minute or two if you wanted to ask something very specific, Khatib. But one thing, know is that he's not ever going to be far away from us, okay? I think that his commitment to this cause of equality is tremendous. He has given basically his life to it. That's all I've ever known him to do. At one point, when we were really in it with the education and dealing with DSIG and all that nonsense, you were there. You were there to help us with the education side of it. So I'm going to keep mine as last, and Alderman Kennedy and Alderman Rhodey, would you like to go first?
Maybe just make a comment, not so much a question. I appreciate
Yes, sir.
your presentation, and I don't know if you, how to say this, but if a person's demeanor is any indication of their commitment, I'm very impressed with your not only your presentation, but how you said it today. So thank you for coming.
Thank you.
I actually think this is fairly timely. Over in the HUD's committee, we've been working on the whole idea of an incentive program and how that should be tied to a business plan for the city. And the business plan, and forgive me, I'm actually fairly, I think I understand economic, I think I understand what was the term you used, not opportunities, but resources. I understand the idea of allocating resources, but opportunities perhaps a little more abstract to me. But when I read through the purpose of a corporation or something, you usually think of a annual report, and in the annual report, the guy running the guy or girl, woman, politically correct here, running the organization, we typically have kind of what their goals are, and then how their activities for the year have been targeted to those goals, so that there's kind of you start out with your business plan, your mission
Absolutely.
statement, and
Absolutely.
you kind of have your tactics and then your strategies. And when you look at SLDC's annual report, and I don't know if you've ever gone through that, but that's usually the first thing I look at when I try to see what an organization's doing. It is largely a list of activities that they did for the previous year. We abated this much property, we went ahead and sold this much stuff out of LRA inventory, but it's almost like a list chronicling all the activities that they did, and there's no real purposefulness. And there's really not any, we're here and we're going there and we were there. And so the business plan is what we're doing with our resources to get from where we are today to where we want to be. And that's, I think, absolutely, the starting point for, what we should you know, how to make ourselves better, I guess. And to that purpose, I actually emailed both of you last weekend about that and would like to sit down and actually talk to both of you some Friday after the board sessions. So what those metrics are and how we measure them, you know, what we measure, you know, to try to figure out what our outcome is. Our desired outcome, we need to have some sort of metrics. And I think that should be part of what is incorporated in our business plan. And I kind of know how to do that numerically, but I'm not really sure I understand or know what the metrics should be.
I think I know what you're trying to say. I've been in leadership roles where, for me, it was important. If I'm sitting at the table and I'm a leader, one of the things I try to make sure is that there's absolutely a plan, that everybody knows what the plan is, how it's going to be inclusive, and what our intended outcomes are, and then report those outcomes. But in the planning process, you do identify those needs, and you assign specifics to it in order to achieve it. And that's something that we don't necessarily do as a city, and more than just a city. But we are in a unique position to make a difference. We're in a unique position to make a difference for the future. If we look at who we are and where we are and what is intended and that is on the table for this city for the next 10 years, the economic development, the explosion of access to health care based on a whole lot of things that were done previously. If we look at the entertainment field, how we are building that as a brand for St. Louis. If we look at how we have improved ourselves as a convention site. So in that, you look at all the things that we touch, and that's why I made the notes about human resources. See, that's the most valuable commodity you have on earth, and most people don't realize that. It's not the pigs, it's not the cars, it's not the gasoline, it's not any of that, it's the human resources. If that is not adequately fueled properly to be at its maximum capacity, then the world fails. And so that's one of the things that we need to concentrate on. And so I'm so excited because these are the things that I try to live by doing every day. And so I'm just excited. And I've been more than excited with what you're trying to do with the St. Louis Development Corporation, because I think we can get there. And some of the things that we've already done in the past on the various commissions and committees that we sit on and form, the documents that have been explored appropriately with data. And now we can take that data and take some of the best practices that we know of, and then use this format here as we execute things to be more inclusive, to be more beneficial to the whole. So I'm excited. I'm excited. I'm sorry, Alderman Kennedy.
Thank you, Manager. Would you review the definition of a racial equity framework for us again?
Sure. The equity framework is both a process and a set of tools and strategies, right, that are used to explicitly put the issue of race and disparities on the table for any decision-making, any planning, any outcomes measurement work that's being done. And the purpose of it is really to reduce disparities across race and ethnicity and improve outcomes for everybody. It's not just about serving black and brown communities. It is about everybody, but it is recognizing, based on the data, that certain groups are more disadvantaged than others. And so if you think about it in a kind of a triage kind of situation, and you've got 4 or 5 people on the scene that have been seriously wounded or harmed, you're going to start with the ones who are most in need first. You're not ignoring the ones who may have just broken their arm or twisted their knee. That's painful enough. But the people who may be at risk of dying, medicine would say you attend to those first. This same framework is saying the same thing, that those who have the worst outcomes, and if we don't assume that those outcomes are bad because there's something wrong with them, but instead because the advantages and opportunities are not fair, then you work with them, and then you improve outcomes for everybody through that process.
So it is a process and
A set of tools
A set of
and
tools.
outcomes and strategies.
process, set of tools, and outcomes.
Yes, sir.
That's all. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
I just wanted to have that clear.
Yes, please, thank
What
you.
happened to my list?
Because we haven't gotten into
Please don't.
how to apply that, you know, what entity to create that could do that. But at least, I just wanted to walk out today with a clear definition
Yes.
of what that is.
Right, right. Alderman Farmer?
Thank you, Madam Chair. My scholarly member of the Joe Caucus covered on things really well there.
Okay.
But, no, but thank you. It was a very dynamic and informative
Joe Caucus
presentation.
is a dominant
And,
voice in
very
this
forward to
committee.
all the future meetings in this. It was very, 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 very nice. Thank you.
Thank you, and I apologize for overlooking you, I didn't know your name and stuff, so
No, no
I
problem.
knew there were other aldermen and alderwomen
there's
in the
not.
room, but I recognized Alderman Rhodey and some folks like that visually.
I strive to stay under the radar.
Yeah, you kind of in your cool suit today, so you
Yeah.
accomplished that.
All righty. Alderman Vaccaro?
I don't really have any comments. I had told Alderman Kennedy when it came up to put my name on it, and I just re-mentioned again today that certainly put my name on it.
Okay. You want your name on the resolution? Okay, I appreciate that. Alderwoman Engrossia?
Thanks for your time today. I just was curious, I looked at Seattle, Madison, Minneapolis, and Portland. I don't know if there are other cities that have undertaken a racial equity lens on their work in city government. But out of those cities, do you find that maybe all of them are doing it well, or some of them are doing it better than others, just with respect to us moving forward?
Yeah. Let me answer that in two parts. One is that I can't right now cite specific metrics that would justify a statement about which one is doing better than the other, but it is a very appropriate question. But the second part of it is something that I suspect you know, and probably everybody in this room, and I know you're not saying this, I just need to lift this up so I'm not trying to put words in your mouth. We've got to do our own work. You've got to go through the process. You can, we certainly can learn from other folks, but every place is different. And we all know that politics is local, economies are regional, and we have to pay attention to what are the dynamics, the opportunities and the challenges for this area. But then I would also, along with that, say that it's necessary but not sufficient for just city government to apply the equity lens. It is huge, step in the right direction. I've been in meetings with Charles, and he might want to say something about where the mayor's office is coming from and put him on the spot. But also in education, and in the physical health fields, and mental health, and in law enforcement, and in child protection, and juvenile justice, and employment. All those pieces are key too, because you all have a critical role. But even if you apply it at the city government level, the private sector is clearly separate from the public sector. And historically, that's been one of the easier ways to avoid a lot of policies that would achieve equity by saying, well, I have the right of free association, and I can use my money and spend it the way I want it, and I'm not going to be involved with public and government because they're trying to tell me how to spend my dollars. So it really does, if we're going to create an equity framework in the region, whether it's Madison or Seattle or Portland, that work has to be done as well. Does that, so I probably didn't respond directly to you.
No, I think it's it definitely responded. And unfortunately, I guess here we only have control over city government, but
Yes.
I do agree that unless it's across the board and across the region, it has limited effect. So thanks for your time.
I would also offer, just another quick thought if I may, that in my privilege and opportunities to work with other jurisdictions around the country, everybody appropriately approaches it the same way you just said. Child protection would say, yes, we understand that schools report, for example, the maltreatment at the highest rate than any other single entity in the community. We don't have any control over the schools, but we can control what we do with kids once they come in our care. And juvenile justice says the same thing. So hence this notion of working across systems becomes really, really important, because city government, like schools, like child welfare, like criminal justice, all impact those same communities where we see the worst outcomes. So it is appropriate for a city government to say, well, we gotta deal with what we can deal with before we start telling somebody else what they need to do. But it might be important to know that there are other entities who are looking at this as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Before I say anything, Commissioner, did you want to have anything? Have anything to say?
The mayor has signaled that he is, we're in conversations around racial equity and what that means for city government and city departments. And I do believe that we will, in the very near future, be pushing forward. I don't want to take words out of his mouth, but I think we will be pushing forward with an initiative in the very near future.
Thank you. One of the things that, as I was taking a few notes here, one thing I understand very well is that if you are not having the conversation in its entirety, there's no reason to have a conversation. So that's where I hope we go with this task, is that we are having the entire conversation. We can't decide that, you know, I want to rewrite the game of jacks or whatever, and then we're only going to play the game my way. We have to be as broad as possible, as inclusive as possible, but also deal with reality. And so reality for me is winning the small tasks first, but having the parallel planning going on to win the large. And so it's a way to move forward with all of this. You can't just go 90 miles an hour trying to knock a wall down because it doesn't work. So I'm excited about just beginning. And also, it's important to recognize everything else that's already in place that can help us with our goals. And so, just a few things that you can look at right here. The SLDC process that we're beginning, the Civil Rights Enforcement Agency and the task that they're doing, and ECHO is working on, and those other agencies like that. The environmental health plan that we have, that we're executing extremely well, and I'll give that to all parties involved. All the universities and everybody is supporting that. Most people don't realize the importance of environmental health. It is a critical issue that must be dealt with. Also, I'll give some credit to the peer plan. I don't like all that paper that was printed, but the peer plan has a lot of purpose to it. If it is inclusive as it moves forward, it can't just be somebody's party and they have the private list of who's invited, but it has to be opened a little bit more, as far as I'm concerned. So there are a lot of things that we already have framed, but we need to bring it together in a different way. And I think that this committee can do that. And I'm already having some other conversations, as I have shared with my two senior aldermen, with the education systems, to bring them in closer to this process. Because they have a lot of resources to help us do our job. We don't have money. We don't have manpower, but they do, and we're going to use it. So there's a lot of good things out here, and I welcome this task, and I'm looking forward to us moving forward. We're not at the point yet where we can go totally public with anything, because we need to frame it, as you said, first. Commissioner?
Madam Chair, if I might, there is, in July of 2015, there was a HUD rule that was published. It was the Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing Rule.
Okay.
Then published, I believe, in January of this year, was what is called the assessment tool. And the assessment tool is different than the analysis of impediments. The assessment tool this time doesn't say, what are your impediments? It says, how are you going to, in various categories, achieve a goal? And there are a number of different, and so they already outline, how are you going to achieve goals in education? They no longer talk about affordable housing, they're now talking about fair housing. And the difference is they're looking at all the other services. How are you creating opportunities for each individual using HUD, using federal resources to do that? And I would just offer that a lot of cities and regions are going to have to now come to grips with. You just don't have to do a little bit of affordable housing. You need to talk about fair housing and how that housing, along with all other services a city or a region provides, how does that come together to create opportunity?
Charles, do you have like a summary sheet on
I can
something like
send
that
one
you
to
could
you.
email me?
Yes.
Right.
I'd be curious
Right.
to understand that.
I remember when Secretary Hud came here, and he was briefing us on that. And all these fancy presentations were made, but we had left out some that he had critical issue about, and one was crime. Yeah, so we can, that's a good one. I'm glad you brought that up. Okay. I know that probably people who are here wish that you could speak, but that's not what we do. We don't have speakers at our committee hearings, but when we have a public meeting, then we'll have a lot of people to speak. I hope that this was informative to all. I again want to thank you. We have had many conversations about need and the way we work here and what is asked of us. It's hard just to get to this point to start the work. Many of us have worked on the outside for years with various commissions and other things that we have served on. I think the two of us probably serve more with health and education than anything else. I used to serve a lot with crime, but you know, sometimes some things you just need to move over here. So I'm looking forward to the future. If there are no other questions,
Can I just raise one?
go right ahead, sir.
Just to point out that, you know, bringing Mr. Waheed here today was the beginning, to just set the foundation and have some clear understandings, common definitions of the terms. At some point, we'd like to also bring in some others who have had the opportunity to try to create at their local levels racial equity lenses and frameworks. We've been in contact with them, just a matter of scheduling them
Absolutely.
in relationship to, you know, the board meetings and the rest of that. So there'll be more. This is just
the beginning, and we do have a lot, and that's why you need to take the time to do this, because there's no reason for us to recreate something that may be successful. And also, it gives us an opportunity to think. You know, when I'm listening, I have the opportunity to think and also categorize some things that I already knew, but I may not have had it in the right place. So I'm looking forward to
Can I
that.
ask one last question? of
Yes,
our
sir.
current speaker? Is, you know, I have a number of large institutions in my ward who I think sincerely and generally have an interest in a number of the topics that you discussed today. And in many cases, I know at St. Louis U, they've hired
Dr. Jonathan Smith.
at a fairly high level.
Yes.
Is there like a regional association for those officers in major institutions to help develop?
I've
like
asked
a
that question.
regional
I've asked that
vision for
question,
us?
yes. Yes, there is.
There is?
And yes, they're
Do they
interested.
produce a document, you know, a document for us, for our region yet, or?
I think what we can start off with is what they already have working, which is the North Side Consortium. And it has in that probably about 18 entities that cover everything from crime, health, women's issues,
But
reproductive,
have they kind of
everything.
created a
And they've got
document?
metrics, all of that. So
Okay.
they're working on that. And then they also have,
They're working, do
No,
they
they
do have it, or?
it exists, and they've been in existence for a moment. They have information that we can use and look at to see what's out there. And so we can definitely get Dr. Jonathan Smith should be one of the people to bring his information in and explain to us where they are and what they're doing. Also, BJC has a community board, advisory board.
Does that work through June?
No, actually, it's a collaboration of BJC Health and the hospitals. I sit on it.
Okay.
And so they have a lot of the right people sitting there who they ask, are they doing the right things? We make suggestions on how they spend their money in the community, how they need to have more accessible health care. And then they report to us what they're doing and all that. And so that's another set of data that we could probably get. And when they come in to speak, you'll find that there's so many things going on that we don't know about, but we probably need to have the ability to put that information out there for people. sometimes people just don't know what's available to them. And that's another part of what we can do better. Yeah, is to make the information available as well. So there's a lot of good things out there, and as you think about them, you know, send them in so we can get a list of those entities or people that we need to touch so that we can move forward. Okay? If there are no other questions, no other comments, again, thank you, Ms. Waheed, and the meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.